The April morning of 1941 was especially warm. The gentle breeze pleasantly refreshed the pilots' faces, rubbed the hem of their raglans. Our regiment was lined up in cascades at the aircraft parking lots, where technicians and mechanics had been working since dawn. Pre-flight preparation was going on. The regiment commander, Major Ivanov, with a planning table in his hands, gave orders about the order of takeoff, work in the zones, reminded about safety measures. He spoke slowly, with the arrangement. He was an experienced commander. We knew that Viktor Petrovich had a great experience of an aviator and complicated flights. The pilots listened to him very attentively for a reason: his ability to emphasize the main thing, to emphasize the peculiarities of the day, each time turned the pre-flight training into a real school for pilots. We loved these early morning hours at the airfield. Airplanes stood uncovered, technicians were working diligently around them, pilots were exchanging remarks. All this inspired confidence, testified to the measured, clear life of the regiment. And in general, for someone who is devoted to aviation, in love with flying, to be at the airfield in the morning a real pleasure. Familiar, barely perceptible smell of gasoline, aromas of steppe grasses, a special atmosphere. It is peculiar only to the airfield. And this airfield, not far from the Moldavian city of Balti, was especially native and familiar. We have been flying the southern sky here for more than 1 month. The border is close by, and it imposes a special responsibility on us. The bright rays of the sun were beating directly into Major Ivanov's face, but he only slightly squinted his big brown eyes, continued to give the pilots the same measured farewell. And suddenly there was some excitement in the regiment. Something distracted our attention. I myself became wary when I heard the distant rumble of engines. The sound of engines was unfamiliar. The regimental commander looked to the west. We all turned there, looking up into the sky. 2 unfamiliar outlines of airplanes were approaching our airfield. A few minutes passed, and they stood on a landing course. What kind of machines are these? Why? Why, thought each of us. Very similar to the Savoys, finally said the commander of our squadron, Sokolov. He can be trusted. The senior lieutenant had combat experience, was a connoisseur of aviation. Pilots heard about this Italian bomber, and the cars are already rolling down the runway, turn off it, approaching the parking lot. Indeed, they are Savoys. And the signs on them are not Italian, someone said. Signs of the Yugoslav Air Force. They have this type of bomber in service, said the regiment commander. He had already given the duty officer the necessary orders, and apparently had a clear idea of what to do. Not far from us, bombers stood up, silenced engines, and immediately from the cabins on the ground descended several people. It was obvious from the insignia that they were senior officers and generals of the Yugoslav Air Force. The regimental commander and the chief of staff went to them. The senior of the arrivals separated from the group, greeted the commander. We heard his report. He spoke in Russian, clearly, but with an accent. Hitler's troops are occupying Yugoslavia. They have approached Belgrade. The country's main airfields are occupied. A group of generals and officers of the Air Force decided not to surrender to the fascist troops, to fly to the Soviet Union. They flew all night. We landed at the first airfield near the border. Please report to the High Command about us. Viktor Petrovich immediately ordered the Chief of Staff of the regiment and Matveev urgently contact the command of the Odessa military district. He gave other orders. Then he invited the Yugoslav pilots to the canteen to have breakfast. In an hour and a half, Savoys flew away. In the cars to escort and assist the crews sat navigator of the regiment Chaika and Inspector Kurilov. Both knew well the route, the peculiarities of landing at the airfield in Odessa. All that day the pilots of the regiment discussed this important event. It once again forced all of us to somehow reassess the international situation. Almost all bourgeois Europe was already under the boot of Hitler's soldier. Poland was drowned in blood. Far away in the Balkans, Yugoslavia had been invaded. The war stood at our borders. The next day the pilots gathered in the classroom. After class, the conversation returned to the most important issue at the time. We are about to receive new equipment. Will we have to fight on Aishachi? Our commander shook his head thoughtfully. Admittedly, we were all worried about it. I-16 is a good fighter, but its age has passed. It is already obsolete. And even more so I-15 Seagull. That night I, like my comrades, could not sleep for a long time. My thoughts were chasing sleep. I wanted to think over everything, to weigh everything. I realized that some formidable events were looming. Was I, as a fighter pilot, ready for them? Was I ready to fight with a strong and cunning air enemy with a versatile combat experience? Involuntarily, I had to look back, to remember how the service was going, to note what was done and what should be urgently made up for. Our fighter aviation regiment was formed relatively recently. In the unit were mostly young pilots, Komsomol members. It was necessary to prepare full-fledged air fighters from them in a short time. There were intensive flights to practice piloting techniques, training air battles, target shooting, ground training. We were looking forward to the appearance of new high-speed fighters, superior to the airplanes of Hitler's Germany. We young pilots had already heard about such machines when we met with the test pilot Stepan Suprun, with whom I had a long-standing friendship. I remember him telling me how the I-185 fighter of Nikolai Nikolaevich Polikarpov's design was being tested. Its speed reached 680 kilometers per hour. It was armed with 2 or 3 guns. It was a dream airplane. In one of the test flights on this fighter crashed the idol of our aviation, Valery Chakalov. There were influential people who cut the finalization of the I-185, although in speed and armament it had no equal in the world fighter. The pilot's dream was buried in the wreckage of the crashed machine. But even mastering the obsolete material part, we were looking for ways to more fully utilize its combat capabilities, to improve piloting techniques and the quality of combat firing. The situation forced us to think and search. I remember well the aerial firing on the cone. They were deplorable for me. The first time there were only 2 holes, the second time 3. And this out of 60 cartridges loaded in the wing machine gun. 12 hits were required for an excellent rating, and 7 for good. When inspecting the cone dropped by the tugboat after the second firing, the squadron commander, after counting the holes, looked at me reproachfully. With such results in aerial firing cannot fight. You'll only irrigate the air. A pilot who can't hit an air target is not a fighter, but a target for the enemy. It was frustrating and embarrassing. I had to study the theory of aerial firing, make schemes of maneuver and aiming, necessary calculations. On the 3rd shooting I achieved such a result, which I did not expect myself. There were 29 holes in the cone. The first success inspired me and made me prepare even better for the shooting. Soon I confidently drove into the cone up to 40 bullets out of 60, and then became a sniper of aerial shooting. I learned to shoot, but he realized that it was not enough to win the battle. As you know, aerial combat is a combination of maneuver and fire to destroy the enemy or repel his attacks. To master the maneuver in combat, this is the task that was set before each pilot, if he seriously prepared himself for future tests. We carefully watched the piloting of the regiment commander Viktor Petrovich Ivanov and our squadron commander Anatoly Sokolov. There was something to learn from them. In the air they acted energetically, bravely. The pilots of the regiment said among themselves they fly like gods. Their aerobatics was exciting as a complex circus performance of talented aerial gymnasts under the dome of the circus. Major Ivanov was a master of piloting an airplane. We knew that he had participated in group aerobatics at aviation festivals in Moscow. Senior Lieutenant Anatoly Sokolov proved his skill and heroism on Khalkhin Gol in battles with Japanese pilots. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Squadron Commander Sokolov was pleased with my successes, but he already in those days saw further than us. Untrained pilots did not let us be deceived by what we had achieved. His advice came in handy in battles with the Nazis. He used to say to me, "You pilot confidently and competently, but the figures should be performed more vigorously with overloads. Pilot so that your eyes get dark. You're physically strong, you do sports. Train your body for increased overload now, in peacetime. In a real battle, you will be able to maneuver away from the enemy with vigorous maneuvering. even being in the crosshairs. Create a high overload on the maneuver, which cannot withstand the enemy. You will achieve victory. I, as well as other pilots, listened to him attentively, followed his advice. We knew that his combat experience came to him in difficult battles. Burned in the air, burned face and hands, said that Anatoly Sokolov, our commander, experienced many things, including the bitterness of failure. He, as they say, did not throw words in vain. His remarks and instructions were businesslike, brief and specific. All this allowed me to quickly master energetic, complex aerobatics on the airplane. And not only me. In those years, both I and my comrades were busy searching for ways that would lead to victory in aerial combat. A lot of reading. In one of the books, I paid attention to the description of human reaction. The author said that the phenomenon seen, transmitted to the brain, undergoes transformation for a response. It takes a quarter of a second. I transferred that to the pilot, calculated how much time the pilot spends on rudder actions and how much time it takes for the airplane to change position. It came out to more than a second. At a flight speed of more than 500 kilometers per hour, 1 second is equal to 140 meters. I decided that it can be used in combat to take into account when conducting maneuvers. The peculiarity of piloting by pilots in training battles also gave me a good idea. In aviation school and in combat units, pilots are taught to fly in a circle and conduct a training battle with the execution of left turns. Gradually, it becomes a habit of many fighters. Pilots performed right turns worse and avoided them in training combat. Taking into account the psychological habit to left turns, I began to train myself to perform a sharp maneuver to the right side. This had a positive effect. Soon the training fights began to end, as a rule, with a victory. Vigorous piloting of the airplane with high overloads required strengthening of physical training. More time began to devote to athletics, skiing. But the most favorite were gymnastics on equipment, the Rhine wheel and trampoline. The regimental commanders noticed this interest, this passion. I was appointed a non-staff chief of physical training of the unit. All thoughts at that time were directed to training myself as an air fighter. However, not everyone approved of my methodology. This in some cases led to conflict situations. But it is not for nothing they say that Siberians are stubborn people. In spite of everything, I firmly stuck to my line. In the fall of the 40s, a group of pilots were sent to a training course for squadron commanders. I was among them. At the course, we were taught the method of planning, theoretical training, taught piloting techniques. In theoretical issues, we got a lot of useful things. The flight training was worse. Exercises, flights around the circle, and into the zone for simple aerobatics were performed on Chaika airplanes. By their tactical and technical data, they were worse than the I-16. They flew without desire. Such training obviously did not correspond to my aspirations to pilot vigorously, to achieve something new in every flight. The head of the course was pedantic, demanded from us calm, correct piloting. He followed the strict implementation of programs and instructions, some provisions of which were clearly outdated. He did not take into account the character and training of the cadets and tried to fit all of them to the standard of an average pilot. My flying style clearly irritated him. Rarely a flying day was without compulsion. You fly to the zone for aerobatics and here. Pokrishkin. Do you want to break the airplane or kill yourself? Comrade Chief. But you have to squeeze everything out of the equipment. How many times have I told you don't make a circus in the zone? You're an irredeemable man. I'm suspending you from flying today. Go. At the parking lot, my fellow students met me with sneers. Well, Sasha? Have you flown today? Did you scare the course director again? He's afraid I'll ruin the Seagull. And I really wanted to break off its top wing and make a monoplane out of a biplane. Maybe it'll fly faster. A combat biplane fighter in the 1940s was already a rarity. Propulsions for dashing turns on takeoff, for deep roll on glide at landing, for going to the gym for gymnastics during self-training weakened the interest to study. With joy he accepted the end of the course. And here I am again in my native regiment. I report on the completion of training to the regiment commander Viktor Petrovich Ivanov. Well, what did you learn at the course? With a smile asks my father. I look into his kind, understanding eyes and frankly answer. We learned the methods, but we learned how to fly. And what was there to learn on? Seagull is like an old horse. No matter how much you push it, it will not run faster. Pilots among themselves call it a heavier-than-air machine. Well, it's in vain. At Khalkhin Gol it showed itself well, parried Ivanov. Although we all knew his love for the I-16. When was that, Comrade Commander? Now we need high-speed fighters. There will be high-speed fighters. Today you have a rest. Get settled with your lodgings. Tomorrow we'll start training for the transition to MiG-3. Time is of the essence. Standing next to Ivanov, Regimental Commissar Grigory Efimovich Chupakov detained me. The commander and I decided whether to appoint you, Alexander Ivanovich, deputy commander of the squadron, or only the commander of the link. The chief of the course complained about you. Any decision you make is law for me. I'll try to justify my trust with honor. Right. And what should I say to the head of the course about your violations? With a sly asked Chupakov. Answer him that now the main order of the party, everyone to prepare themselves for the defense of our homeland. A fighter cannot fly quietly, yes, Polagonichku, if he wants to fulfill a sacred duty to the fatherland. You must fly boldly and vigorously, so bequeathed to us Chakalov, so teaches us and the regiment commander. Well, you're not boring. You, Viktor Petrovich, are to blame for everything. How do you like it? Everything will be all right. When he becomes a boss, he will experience for himself how to educate his subordinates. Ivanov smiled. We were very pleased with the message that soon we will begin retraining on the MiG-3. In a cheerful mood we went to settle in the hostel, the former school of the State Farm. The main time of the regiment personnel in May and June of the 41st year was spent at the Mayaki Field airfield. I have long remembered this flying field, overgrown with clover. To the right and left along the runway were fields of corn. Around them were the airplane parking lots. Every day, including Sundays, there was the hum of engines over the airfield. Only sometimes there was silence due to the arrival of the division commander, General Osipenko, who was characterized by great strictness. Having landed on a liaison plane, he often cancelled flights for any reason and ordered to do formation training. True, it happened not so often. Finally came MiGs. The first to be retrained on the new technique was the management staff. I was in this group, appointed after the course as deputy commander of Sokolov's squadron. The pilots were taken out on UT-4 personally by the regiment commander. His excellent piloting technique and high methodical skills allowed us to quickly master the landing of the airplane at high speed and vigorous aerobatics in the zone. Viktor Petrovich had a great experience in this business. In his time he taught flying on I-16 pilots of Republican Spain, who later became famous in air battles with German and Italian aviation. Having mastered the machine, I soon began to train the flying personnel of our squadron on UT-4 to fly in circles and in the zone. Anatoly Sokolov took charge of the flights and instructed the pilots between sorties. After landing, as a rule, he jumped on the wing of the airplane and, blown by the airstream from the propeller, ducked down to the pilot sitting in the cockpit, made remarks, pointed out errors in flight. Oh, and this with the engine running. In those days there were no radio stations on our fighters, and the commander could give advice only on the ground. It was painful to see with what overload Sokolov acted on flights. The southern sun scorched his face and hands, burned in the fire of an airplane on Khalkhin Gol. The burned skin became fiery red. All of us in those days worked with a huge load. We knew that the international situation was difficult, that fascist Germany was concentrating its army near our borders. The flying staff of the squadron was different in training. Some had to pay special attention to teach them to fly, as required for the transition to the MiG-3. There was also a breakdown of psychological skills acquired in flights on the previous aircraft. Some people found it difficult to learn new things. Semyon Ovchinnikov had a particularly difficult time. By his character, he was more suitable for staff work. Given this, Ovchinnikov, and was appointed adjutant of our squadron. He stubbornly defended his principles of action in the air, was an ardent supporter of smooth piloting techniques. Our arguments sometimes reached the point of quarrels. Semyon, when will you stop piloting the airplane in slow motion? You pause between aerobatics. That's no way for a fighter to operate, I argued. It gives the enemy time to attack and aim. I'm piloting correctly. What are you doing to the car? You're throwing it so much that you're about to rip the tail off the wings. There's no other way to do it. If you want to win, you've got to be more energetic. Don't be afraid of overload. You've got to make your eyes dark. You know what? You fly your way, and I'll fly the way I'm supposed to. Change your mind, or you'll be shot down in the first air battle. It was difficult to prove to Ovchinnikov that the formation of a fighter, the formation of his qualities professional, moral, volitional goes now, in the course of flights, in the days of training. In mid-May, the first 3 MiG-3 came from the factory. Everyone liked the airplane with its swift and formidable forms. With great desire, I began to master it, and later to retrain the link assigned to me. Soon we successfully completed flights around the circle, made several sorties to the zone. At the end of May, I was called Ivanov. Pokrishkin. You have already mastered with your Squadron MiG-3. Boxes with airplanes for the entire regiment arrived at the airfield in Balti. The technical staff started assembling them. It's urgent to fly the MiGs here in Myaki. I think that the unit will successfully cope with this task. Thank you for your trust, Comrade Commander. We'll fulfill the task. We'll transfer you to Balti by TB3. Take into account that a concrete strip is being built at the airfield. The ground is dug up. There are a lot of people and transport. I'll allow only you to fly over the assembled airplanes. Is that clear? Yes, Comrade Commander. Start in the morning to fulfill it. Time is of the essence. During this period in the squadron there were changes. Anatoly Sokolov was leaving for training, and his replacement, after graduation, arrived Captain Fedor Vasilievich Atrashkevich. He had not flown the MiG-3 yet. He had to command the unit and retrain himself. Early in the morning, seated in the cockpit gunner's heavy bomber TB3, flew to Balti. Speed is low, and I carefully observed the terrain, marked the characteristic landmarks for the ferry MiG-3. A familiar landmark appeared in the distance. It was a gasoline depot on a hillock near the airfield. Painted white to reduce the evaporation of fuel, tanks stood out on the green background of the area bright spot, were noticeable from afar. Apparently the workers of the aviation rear, showing care about fuel, did not think of the need to hide the tanks underground or camouflage them. We repeatedly said at the meetings that in case of a strike on the airfield, all the fuel reserves would blow up. Here comes Balti. The plane is landing. We should be happy. But the whole group looked indignantly at the dozens of airplane crates standing in the southern part of the airfield. What is this? The most difficult situation at the western borders. And someone ordered to the front-line airfield, near the border, to concentrate the combat equipment of the entire regiment. One enemy raid on the airfield, and all the MiGs would go up in flames. What is this carelessness? 1-hour link should help to diffuse this powder cellar. With such thoughts and approached the work site. A little calmed that the technical staff under the guidance of the chief engineer of the regiment Sholokovich, understanding the situation, worked on the assembly without sparing any effort. Several machines had already been assembled and tested on the ground. Without wasting a minute, took the first fighter on a flight. It went well. Soon on 3 MiGs at extremely low altitude went to Myaki. We returned on TB3. By evening we overflew and overtook another 3 airplanes. We were exhausted for that day, but we knew that we were doing important and necessary work. In the following days I included elements of complex aerobatics in the vertical plane in the complex of overflight. It was an additional training, which I did not have time to do in Myaki. With each flight I got to know the new machine better and better. Even the feeling of merging with the airplane appeared. With each flight it grew and strengthened. And the fighter liked it more and more. The airplane was created for vertical combat, and piloting it, I tried to master vertical figures. Once, Diving on the airfield, I vigorously brought the plane near the ground on the hill. Suddenly I felt a sharp warming in the cockpit. I looked at the instruments. The water temperature increased rapidly. Here it is already above the permissible norm. Immediately went to land, reported to Sholokovich about the malfunction in the engine cooling system. The inspection revealed a break in the radiator flap. "Breakage. Nothing terrible," Sholokovich said calmly. "We will replace the flap with another one and everything will be all right." He was supported by the team leader from the factory, seconded to the assembly of aircraft. "No, comrades. This will not do," I objected. "This is a design defect. The flap is made of a very thin sheet of dural. At high speed it can break off at any moment." "How do you fly?" "Not only the flap, but also the wings can break off." The tests at the research institute did not reveal such a defect. The representative of the plant stood his ground. "I don't know how you tested there, but the defect is serious," I objected. "In combat can be even higher speeds on the piloting, even higher overloads. What do you want? That the pilots, because of the flap in combat, forced to land next to those who were shot during the assault? Let's check another airplane." The second flight with a steep dive also led to the rupture of the radiator flap. There was nothing to argue about. We gave a telegram to the factory. I should note that the defect was eliminated promptly. Factory crews replaced the flaps first in our regiment, then in other units. In the course of overflight and distillation of airplanes, our squadron managed to work out many elements of aerobatics. All pilots had a sense of cohesion with the MiG-3 in flight, ready to conduct air battles on it. One thing bothered me: the armament on this machine was still weak. Unfortunately, in combat we would have to compensate for this shortcoming by accurate firing from a short distance. We always flew to Mayaki at extremely low altitude, at a strafing flight, over the very tops of trees or a few meters above the crops. Such flights required from the pilot great self-control, exceptional attention and clear movements of the airplane control rudders. In the course of them, a psychological readiness to fly the fighter close to the ground was formed. And the flight itself was exciting. You could really feel the speed. I considered shaving flight as a serious preparation of a pilot for real combat operations, escape from anti-aircraft fire, for example when flying at low altitude. Closer to the ground, and anti-aircraft gunners will not be able to fire, will not have time to turn around. And local objects, including their own equipment, will interfere with them. The second half of June brought new worries. Our squadron was preparing to relocate to Balti. There we had to go on combat duty and continue retraining on new equipment. Valentin Fidjichev's squadron flew to the flying ground near the border in the area of Pilitsa Station. He was assigned the task of intercepting Nazi aerial scouts. I was entrusted with my link to overtake the last 3 MiGs. We were preparing to fulfill this task when I was told that the regiment commander called me. Ivanov looked angry. "Are you indulging yourself in shaving flights? Do you want to break your neck? Stop it immediately." "Yes, comrade commander. I forgive this liberty only in connection with the successful ferrying of airplanes." "Bandits. Tomorrow you'll fly here on the last 3 MiG-3s. From here you'll drive them to Kirovograd, to the squadron commander's courses. On the way you'll land in Grigoriopol. There you will be joined by a couple more airplanes." After breakfast, on Tuesday, June 17th, we flew by TB3 to Balti. The airfield here is more spacious. The squadron hadn't arrived yet. Empty airplane crates had already been sent to the aircraft factory. Having taken a car, I and my wingman Leonid Dyachenko and Pyotr Dobnia jumped up to our apartments in the city. Knocking, I entered the hallway. The owner of the house where we rented a room with Kostya Mironov met me politely. That surprised me. Why should it be? He had never spoken to us before, greeting us only with a nod of the head. Now he asked about my health, about Kostya. I could sense that something was bothering him. And indeed he moved on to a hot topic of late the possible war with Nazi Germany. "Did you see a German airplane flying over the city this morning?" "No, I did not," I answered, going to go out to the car. "You listen to me. This week Germany will attack the Soviet Union. Hitler's armies are standing at the border. What will happen to us? Where will we old men go? All hope is in you. If the Red Army doesn't defeat Hitler, he will destroy us Jews. Don't believe it, I tried to calm the old man. Rumours. Believe me, it's all true. My sons live in Bucharest. They told me that on Sunday the war will start. What should I tell him? He's convinced the rumours are true. With the excuse that we had to leave, we left for the airfield. But the old man's message never left my mind. Having driven the last 3 planes to Myaki, I informed the regiment commander about the conversation with the owner of the house. Everything can be, Ivanov said thoughtfully. One way or another, but we will have to fight, and soon. Too bad that we did not have time to fully retrain. We got the MiGs too late. Go and get ready for the ferry. By morning the weather had turned bad. Clouds were touching the tops of trees with their rags. By the middle of the day the weather improved a little, and I, having learned that in Grigoriopol the height of clouds was already up to 200 meters, turned to Ivanov. Comrade Commander, permit to take off. The link is prepared for flights at extremely low altitudes, and now the cloud cover is more than 100 meters. It will be difficult to land in Grigoriopol. There is a lower edge of 200 meters. This does not scare us. In Balti, when testing MiGs, we practiced a new method of calculating the landing, simpler and easier. What new method is that? For MiG-3, with its high landing speed and high mileage, it is easier to calculate the landing by planning at medium engine speed. Planing with the throttle off, as was done on the old airplanes, makes the calculation very difficult. Inventors. I do this landing myself sometimes. It's safer to do it in a confined area if the pilot is injured or the airplane is damaged. Well, if you've practiced this landing, take off. Our trio was in the air in an hour. We set a course for Grigoriopol airfield. Only in the air I realized what a heavy responsibility I had taken on. We had to fly at extremely low altitude. The overhanging cloud, especially in the second half of the way, pressed us more and more to the ground. Its hanging fringe sometimes completely covered the terrain. In the gaps there were glimpses of woods and forest strips, wheat fields. I anxiously cast a glance in the direction of the wingmen. But Leonid Dyachenko and Pyotr Dovnia kept in line confidently. If not for their art, we would have had to return. Closer to Grigoriopol the clouds lifted, and we finally saw rows of tents on the airfield, standing airplanes. But we were not allowed to fly further. The commander of the local unit did not want to hear about continuing the route. He gave the command to stay here until the end of the week. What unpleasant days those were. Bad weather and rain-soaked tent were annoying. The delay of the flight was worrying. Only one thing brightened the gloomy mood. There were many familiar pilots in the regiment, participants of the Soviet-Finnish War. Listening to their stories about battles with British planes, involuntarily distracted from worries, perceiving all the useful things that friends told. Only on Saturday over the airfield there were gaps in the clouds. The chief of staff of the regiment, whom we met during breakfast in the dining room, warned that the flight was scheduled for Monday morning. Smiling, he wished us a good rest for a couple more days. Comrade Major, from idleness will soon howl, making a suffering face, entered into the conversation Dyachenko. Give the car to go to the city. Well, not to howl, we'll give you a car, promised the major. However, be aware the city commandant is very strict. The driver of the car knew this small town well. He advised us to go to a restaurant on the bank of the Dniester. Careful Leonid Dyachenko quickly arranged for a table to be set up on the veranda. A good lunch, vases with strawberries and cherries, a beautiful view of the Dniester raised our spirits. I was glad that in a day we would return home to Balti. Dyachenko was especially cheerful. Before going to bed, he told us his plan for tomorrow. Tomorrow we should visit once again a wonderful establishment on the bank of the Dniester. We went to bed in a cheerful mood. We had no idea that Dyachenko's wish would not be fulfilled, that he would give his young life defending the sky of the motherland and would be buried on the land of Ukraine. After all, it was Saturday, June 21st, 1941. Who in those hours knew what Sunday afternoon would be like? Frequent ringing sounds picked up from the bed. They were hitting the rail. An alarm. I habitually fumbled in the darkness for clothes and boots, and nearby the stomping of the regiment's aviators running past the tent. Dyachenko, looking at me from the bed, grumbled unhappily. "Why did you jump up? At home you are tired of drill alarms, and here they don't let you sleep. What do we have to do with the affairs of this regiment?" "Stop talking. Hurry up and get dressed. Catch up with us. We went to the CP, I warned my comrade. Indeed, lately, training alarms have been announced often, and it somehow dulled the wariness. But today these signals made me remember the conversation with the owner of the apartment in Balti. I quickly ran to the regiment's control center, located on the border of the airfield. Here, a large group of pilots. They received instructions from the chief of staff of the regiment, and the rumble of engines was growing over the airfield. There was no doubt there is a dispersal of aircraft. You could feel the tension in everything. It was immediately transmitted to me. Squeezing in to the chief of staff, asked, "What happened? Combat or training? War. There's already fighting on the border. There may be a strike on the airfield." War. That word alone made me dumbfounded for a few seconds. Then I began to think feverishly what we should do. Keep chasing airplanes or return to our regiment? The last events flashed quickly in my mind. What about Balti? How are things going there? There's bound to be a raid on the airfield and the city. Who will repel the blow? My squadron is here in Grigoriopol. Fidjichov's is at the landing site. This is half of the squadron, and the most prepared. We've made a decision we must fly to Balti. Stop. Our airplanes have no weapons and no ammunition, so we can't fly to Balti, only to Myaki. Comrade Chief of Staff, let us return to our regiment. Let the technicians prepare our planes for departure. Stand down. All the technicians are busy now. 2 squadrons are preparing to fly to Kishinev. But we can't wait. I make a decision to prepare airplanes for the flight by my link. I still have the experience of a senior aviation technician. Dovbyanya, Dyachenko, quickly to the planes, we'll fly to Myaki. And we ran to the parking lot, to our MiGs. And from the airfield already began to take off in links of I-16s and MiG-3s. They were taking a course to the west. Soon, behind the Dniester, luminous traces drew the gloomy sky. There was a rumble of bomb bursts. The ground beneath our feet shook. Well done, neighbours. They managed to intercept the enemy planes, did not let them hit the airfield. A group of bombers, attacked by fighters, turned to the left. Trapezoidal wings characteristic of the Ju-88 became visible. The bomber formation began to break up and 2 burning airplanes fell out of it. Rapidly falling torches, they crashed into the ground west of the Dniester. We stood amazed. That's how it is. War, I thought, having seen a real air battle for the first time. Soon our troika approached the Myaki airfield. The parking lots were empty, all the planes were scattered on the edges of cornfields and camouflaged. After landing and I approached the corn. The wingmen stopped nearby and turned off their engines. I had to intervene. You're all lined up like a parade, aren't you? Have you forgotten? This is a war. Get out of the way now. A regimental engineer approached our planes. I immediately addressed him. I ask you to shoot the weapons of our planes and prepare the MiGs for departure. Shoot the weapons on my plane at 100 meters. This is not according to the instructions, calmly objected Sholokovich. It is supposed to be at 200 meters. In these minutes, every second of delay seemed to me a crime. Let the weaklings shoot at 200 meters, and I will shoot at 100 and less. All right, we'll shoot the way you want, agreed the engineer, realizing that time indeed does not bear, and seeing my hotness. At the command post, I did not find the regiment commander. I turned to the chief of staff and Matveev. I report in view of the special situation. The performance of the task of ferrying airplanes stopped. The unit returned to the regiment. That's good. I need you. Look here. He pointed out a settlement circled with a red pencil on the map. Here, near the village, Ivanov landed without fuel on a UT-4. You'll fly there on the U-2. Inform the commander of the situation and tell him to fly to Mayaki immediately. Why me, Comrade Chief of Staff? Allow the squadron to fly to Balti. Half of our squadron is fighting there. Matveyev didn't interrupt me. Apparently he understood the pilot's condition at such moments. He was somehow detached. Apparently he had already experienced this news, he said. It's already less than halfway through. Atrashkevich had not yet arrived from Pylitsa. Ovchinnikov was killed in battle when enemy planes raided the airfield. The second squadron flew there for reinforcement. What will they use to refuel? The fascists burned the fuel. The situation there is difficult. I see that our Chief of Staff is thinking. But somehow I didn't get the meaning of his words. Allow me to fly there as a link. We're trained on MiGs. You can send anyone on a U-2. There's no need to fly to Balti. Hurry to Ivanov, understand? Execute the order. His voice was firm. Having familiarized myself with the situation with the Deputy Chief of Staff, upset by everything I had learned, I went to the U-2. It was hard to believe that in those very first hours of the war, such events had taken place. I found the regiment commander quickly. After landing, I briefly reported to him about the tragedy at the airfield of Balti. After listening to the report, Ivanov stood silently for some time, staring into the distance. Then, having given me instructions and advice on further actions, he flew to the regiment. I was left alone, cursing the last run of MiGs, which torn away from the squadron. Only now I clearly visualized the events at the airfield in Balti, which the staff officer reported before departure. How ridiculous everything turned out. On the first day of the war, our squadron was missing 2 units, and the most trained ones at that. Who was to blame for this? Bad weather prevented our group to finish the transportation of equipment to Kirovograd and return to their unit. However, on Saturday we could have accomplished this task if we had shown perseverance in Grigoriopol Regiment. It turns out that we should blame ourselves for losing our sense of alertness in a threatening environment. Valentin Fidjichov's unit, based near the town of Ungeni, was on combat duty on the eve of the war and had the goal of intercepting border violators. On Thursday, Hitler's scout went deep into our territory. The platoon shelled him. This caused the anger of the division commander. On Saturday, the regiment commander V, Ivanov and squadron commander F. Atrashkevich were sent to Pylitsa to restore order in Fidjichev's link by order of General Osipenko. In addition, in Kishinev was summoned wing commander Selevastov. So it turned out that when the war broke out, the regiment had no commander, many squadron and wing commanders, the units were scattered. The absence of 2 squadrons and F. Atrashkevich at the airfield on the morning of June 22nd, and a total of 8 of the most trained pilots, led to the loss of combat effectiveness of the squadron. 5 ordinary pilots who were on the airfield, not yet fully retrained on the MiG-3, led by the adjutant of the squadron Semyon Ovchinnikov and the commander of the link Konstantin Mironov, did everything to repel the attack of a large group of bombers, covered by Messerschmitts. But the forces were unequal. It was not possible to prevent a blow to the airfield. Hitlerites lost 3 airplanes, but Ovchinnikov was killed in the battle. It was sad to think about all this. I wanted to return to the regiment sooner. The soul longed for battle. My battle friends had already been fighting for half a day, and I was waiting for fuel. In the middle of the day, a gasoline truck finally arrived. I immediately refueled the airplane and flew to Mayaki. Dyachenko and Dovmia were waiting for me at the airfield. When will we be given a mission? Tired of waiting under the wing of the airplane, the first thing I heard from them. Now I'm going to the control. I'll find out everything, I reassured the wingmen. Reported to the commander about arrival and immediately asked, "Give us a combat mission. Already half a day everyone is fighting, and my wingmen are like at a resort. The task will be difficult for you. Fly out in a formation and scout the presence of enemy aircraft at the airfields of Iasi and Romani. Do not engage in combat. The main thing is reconnaissance." Immediately the 3 of us sat down to prepare for the fulfillment of the combat mission. We plotted the flight route on maps, talked about actions when meeting with enemy fighters. We took off. The group approached the airfield of Yassi at extremely low altitude. They made a slide and went into a turn around the airfield. The airfield is empty. It's clear they are afraid to sit here. The border is close, but there were plenty of anti-aircraft guns. They were hitting from all sides. We dropped sharply and at low altitude went along the highway to the west. The midday sun was to our left and so the road was well visible. Small columns and individual vehicles were moving along it. At our appearance, enemy soldiers jumped out of their bodies and threw themselves into ditches. We wanted to hit them with machine guns, but remembering Ivanov's instruction, we restrained ourselves. I decided to mislead the enemy about the direction of further flight. The wing took a course to the west, crossed the Siret River, and came to Romani from the west. They found the airfield quickly. The airplanes were clearly visible on the green background of the airfield. The accumulation is large, as at an air show. More than 200 airplanes of different types. Some were refueling. We had to visually memorize the parking places and the number of bombers, fighters, scouts. And it is impossible to circle over the airfield. Around us, flakes of explosions, glowing traces of small-caliber anti-aircraft guns. We must leave immediately, or there will be no one to report the results of reconnaissance. Again, we switched to a soaring flight. After landing, we quickly drew a plan of the airfield, the location of airplanes and anti-aircraft facilities. As they say, God has not offended me visual memory, but the wingman supplemented the data. Ivanov thanked for the excellent reconnaissance. Comrade Commander, we must immediately hit this exhibition with the entire regiment. That's where they were flying from to bomb our airfield in Balti. We should burn them while the airplanes are on the ground, I suggested to Viktor Petrovich. Don't be so hot. We can't make such a decision without the division's consent. They'll soap our necks for arbitrariness. Go to the parking lot and wait for orders. The sun was already sloping toward the horizon, and the command to fly to Romanov was not received. Dyachenko did not cease to resent. Well, why did we, as dumbfounded, ran amidst anti-aircraft fire? What good that mapped the airfield with airplanes? Don't whine. And so nauseating, I interrupted Dyachenko. Time still allows. Maybe we'll take off. At this time from the control room was a phone call to be in readiness number 1. Rejoiced, quickly climbed into the cockpit. Minutes passed, no rocket for departure. The telephonist came running and reported that 3 enemy bombers were flying in the direction of our airfield. Everyone to be ready to repel the attack. The order was transmitted from the control room. Well, we did not hit them in Romani. Now they will hit our airfield. I was angry at such disorderliness and slowness. And, as you know, anger does not lead to good. Airplane technician I. Vakhnenko, looking carefully into the sky, shouted, "Comrade Commander, they're flying." I looked in the direction where he was pointing with his hand. I saw a group of bombers in the distance. With the first contact, I started the engine and drove out of the parking lot. The engines on the other planes started. Knowing that takeoff is made on command from the SCP from different directions, I decided to take off before everyone else. But why are there no rockets for departure on the alert? Excruciating seconds, and suddenly over the control room soared 3 red lights. Immediately took off and rushed to the bombers. Here they are not far away. Airplanes painted in black, green and yellow spots. The design is completely unfamiliar. I turned a little towards the bombers, and the low evening sun blinded me. It did not allow me to look more closely during these short seconds of rapprochement type of machines. I decided that the enemy was about to bomb the airfield. I throw my plane in a sharp turn. I go to the tail of the leftmost and from 50 meters open fire, but had time to give only a short cue as my plane from the jet attacked spontaneously makes a barrel. The bomber, turning to the left, went down. That's enough, I thought. Turned my plane to the right flank of the group, making a slide to attack from above. And then I was dazed on the wings of the stars. What have I done? I attacked my own airplane. I'm flying next to the group and I don't know what to do next. When I saw the MiGs that took off later than me rushing towards the group, I threw the airplane in front of them. I wiggle my wings, put myself under their sights, not allowing anyone to shoot. Soon our pilots understood the situation and went to the airfield. I was the only one flying next to the group and could not decide what to do. Shame and disgrace burned my heart. A stray thought of making a turn into the ground. I was deterred from this action by the appearance of other bombers in the air, in the column of which was attached and the group I attacked. So that's it. Everyone is going to Romani. That's my justification to block the airfield, and not to let the fighters take off. Above the airfield, under heavy anti-aircraft fire, my fighter circled for 15 minutes. I was ready to attack the enemy planes. But no one took off, and our bombers never came up. Probably they were working on other targets, I decided, and set a course for home. I'm approaching Yassam. Columns of smoke below. It all makes sense. Ours were bombing an enemy troop concentration near the Prut River. In these minutes I calmed down a little. I realized that I had only one way out to justify my deed in further battles. In Myaki, trying not to be seen by the pilots, I went to the command post. I appeared before Ivanov. I'm standing there, keeping silent. The commander looks at me, and there is anger and pain in his eyes. Well, hero, you've distinguished yourself. How did you manage to shoot down your Su-2? Don't ask me. I'm sick to my stomach. I went in against the sun and didn't see the stars on the camouflage colouring. I wanted to hit the ground after that. What are you doing? Are you out of your mind? Is it your fault? Don't rush off before you know who's in front of you. The group was already near the airfield. I thought they were Germans, so I decided to attack faster, not to let them drop their bombs. Anyway, like an angry dog off the chain. All right, calm down. In another time, the prosecutor would have asked you other questions. The plane that was hit was forced down. It's a pity that the navigator was wounded. The technique will be restored. Several pilots of the regiment listened attentively to this conversation. Comrade Commander, why didn't they show our new planes? According to rumours, there is still a bomber P-2, similar to the Mi-110. At least they sent albums with photos of our planes. Otherwise we'll beat our own, so that strangers will be afraid. Voices were heard. All have spoken out. Ivanov couldn't stand it. Regiment command will take your requests into account. He was going to say something else, but involuntarily listened. Over the airfield appeared MiGs. We realized that a group arrived from the airfield of Balti. The pilots landed from the start. One of the fighters with a stopped engine did not reach the runway. It landed on a cornfield. The pilot managed to retract the landing gear in time. As it turned out later, the engine of Alexei Ovsyankin's airplane stalled due to complete exhaustion of fuel. But he was not confused and coped with a difficult landing. We focused all our attention on the arrived pilots. Everyone wanted to see those who had already fought with the enemy today. They were heroes for us. Atrashkevich, who brought the group, reported to the regiment commander on the events of the first combat day. Before dawn came the signal of combat alarm. There were only 7 pilots of the 1st Squadron on the airfield. They quickly dispersed and camouflaged aircraft, including those requiring repair. In this situation, the commander of the link Mironov showed high organizational qualities. And at dawn on the airfield came to the scout Henschel 126. To intercept it instantly went up Mironov's unit. The pilots acted skillfully. They shot down the scout. Returning to the airfield, they met a large group of bombers west of Balti. U-88 were covered by Messerschmitts. 4 of our pilots had already fought with them. They fought bravely. But the ratio in numbers was clearly in favor of the enemy. The strike on the airfield 7 could not reflect. Bombers dropped bombs on the parking lots, on the gasoline warehouse and barracks where the builders lived. Young, poorly trained builders ran scattering from the airfield. Many fell under the bombs. Ovchinnikov was killed when repulsing the raid, said Atrashkevich, and on the ground were killed senior technician Kamayev and motorist Vakhtyrov. The gasoline depot was blown up, and the airfield was left almost without fuel, and a new group of enemy bombers was already coming to the airfield and the city. Pilot Surov went up to meet it. His plane was running out of fuel. And yet he shot down the U-88. But then the engine stopped. On planning, he was attacked by a pair of Mi-109s and set on fire. That's how this brave fighter died. Motor transport was given to evacuate women and children. Their sending to Odessa was organized by the commissar of the regiment. Atrashkevich finished his story. It is impossible to leave them in Balti. Everything is clear. At dinner, we will summarize the results of the first combat day. In the dining room, I asked Atrashkevich why Mironov had not arrived. Why didn't he arrive? He flew out with the group. Apparently, he ran out of fuel and sat down somewhere on a forced landing. Look for him, he asked me. Valentin Fidjichov came up, grinned. Sashka, they say you also distinguished yourself today, shot down your Su-2. Don't disturb my soul. Better tell me what happened in Pirlitz. There's nothing much to tell. We intercepted an intruder on Thursday. He started shooting back, so he fired a burst from the machine guns. We got carried away and skipped the border. On Saturday, Ivanov flew in and Atrashkevich arrived. There were a lot of reproaches. Even a representative of the district prosecutor's office flew in. How does it all work? They, bastards, insolently violated our border, and you can't touch them. Dyachenko entered the conversation. We should have shot them down. I myself regret that I did not destroy, but only pierced this scout, and this morning they covered us with artillery fire, and we barely managed to fly out of there under the bursting shells. And how did Ovchinnikov die? I asked Atrashkevich. He fought on curves. But a MiG-3 is not a seagull. He was pinned down by a pair of Mi-109s and shot down. He fell on the edge of the airfield. All the pilots of the regiment gathered for dinner. The commander tapped a glass with a knife. Everyone fell silent. Comrades. Before we begin dinner, I want to conduct a brief review of the regiment's actions on the first day of the war with Nazi Germany and its allies. First of all, let's honor the memory of those who gave their lives today for our motherland. Semyon Yakovlevich Ovchinnikov, Alexander Matvievich Surov, link technician Dmitry Arkadyevich Kamayev, and motorist Fadi Viktorovich Vaktorov died. They stood in silence for a minute, looking at the places where their comrades in arms always sat. Small bouquets of wildflowers were on the plates. How many more such losses will there be? And maybe, and on my plate will lie a bouquet of flowers. Major Ivanov told about the courage and bravery of our pilots in the first battles. According to the regimental reconnaissance in the area of Balti, we shot down about 10 airplanes. Mironov in the morning shot down a scout, Henschel 126. Atrashkevich shot down the commander of the enemy air group, a major, awarded the Iron Cross. Then Viktor Petrovich reported on the combat successes of other parts of the division. The pilots of the 4th Fighter Aviation Regiment successfully repelled enemy air raids on Grigoriopol and Tiraspol airfields. The regiment also fought over Kishinev and shot down about 20 enemy airplanes during the day. Squadron Commander Morozov rammed an Mi-109, and Captain Kaftanov, also a squadron commander, shot down 3 planes. I knew this brave fighter. Before his arrival in the regiment, he was a test pilot, perfectly mastered the combat machine. In the first hours of the war, the personnel of the 63rd Fighter Aviation Regiment showed themselves well. Here also organized repelled 2 raids of the Romanian aviation, was shot down more than 20 airplanes. Such information Ivanov pleased us. It somehow reduced the pain of the soul for the dead comrades in arms. It turns out, skillfully fighting, you can successfully beat the praised Hitler's ace. Atrashkevich asked the commander of the unit, Comrade Major, where are Kryukov and Mironov? Kryukov, by order of the division commander, flew a couple of reconnaissance flights to the Plesty area and did not return. There's no information about him yet. Mironov flew to Balti, but didn't arrive here at the airfield. The message about Pavel Pavlovich Kryukov, the nature of his task, caused bewilderment among the pilots. The flight was distant, at the limit of fuel reserve, the area was not studied. Everyone involuntarily imagined himself in Krukov's place. Such reconnaissance should be carefully prepared, conducted by stronger groups. Major Ivanov glanced angrily into the hall, and everyone fell silent. We knew that the regimental commander, a career officer, did not tolerate any manifestations of displeasure. Squadron commanders, I order tomorrow to organize the equipment of shelters for all aircraft and warn the personnel that during the bombing cannot run, but must lie on the ground in crevices, shelters. A direct hit to a person is very rare. If we teach the personnel to behave properly during bombing, then casualties on the ground will be extremely rare. Now everybody get some sleep. Early in the morning we'll start the combat work. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. I was worried about Kostya Mironov, my friend, and it would be necessary for a short night in June to throw off the load of today. My thoughts about the Su-2, as well as my attempt to block the airfield in Romania alone, prevented me from sleeping. I realized more and more that by taking on such a task, I was getting cocky. I could not do it alone. Luckily for me, there were no Messerschmitts in the air, otherwise I could have died beautifully in front of the enemy pilots and technicians. Early morning. From the east the sky was getting brighter and brighter, and only in the west it was covered with night gloom. From the airfield came the growing rumble of running engines. It was interrupted by the crackle of short bursts from machine guns. It was the technical staff checking the serviceability of weapons. Firing of weapons from today was ordered to be carried out from the parking lots, and not in a shooting gallery, as it was established in the days of peace. The pilots stood in squadrons around their commanders. They watched the tracks, drawing from different directions the dark horizon. All were silent, occasionally looking in the direction of the command post of the regiment. They involuntarily thought about the results of yesterday, about what the day to come is preparing for us. The family pilots were worried about the fate of their relatives who remained in Balti. A short sleep did not bring rest. Drowsiness overcame them. The silence was broken by Dyachenko. "Hey, I want to sleep, at least a couple of hours. How can it be a rest, just 4 hours?" That's what I wanted. Yesterday, almost all day long, you lay under the wing of the airplane, and today you want to repeat your feat. Is your uncle going to fight for you? You'll live till winter, then you'll get some sleep, responded Fidjichov. But you didn't do much yesterday either, retorted Dyachenko. He wanted to say something else, but held back. Ivanov and Matveev came out of the command center. Something long they conjured up. Pilots with clipboards and pencils in their hands prepared to listen to instructions. Ivanov looked at everyone carefully. The front line within the actions of our regiment is unchanged and runs along the Prut River. Our task for today, to strike at troop concentrations and enemy columns in Romania, the reflection of enemy air raids in the regiment's operating area, as well as, said the commander, reconnaissance, and prevent the breakthrough of enemy aircraft deep into Ukraine. In squadrons, Ivanov ordered to keep one link in readiness to reflect a possible raid on our airfield. Specific combat missions, he warned, will be set later. And now to the airplanes. Quickly loaded into the backs of cars, all parted. Having heard the technician Ivan Vakhnenko about the readiness of the aircraft, I began to wait for the order to carry out the combat task. I felt bad this morning. Every now and then in my mind the picture of Su-2 attack came up. I was tormented by the unknown about Kostya Mironov. I was deeply worried about his fate. We had long ago formed a true friendship. 3 bachelors, me, Mironov and Pankratov, lived in the same apartment in Kirovograd and then in Balti for almost 2 years. We spent our free time together. Where is Kostya now? What about him? These questions did not give rest. We brought breakfast to the airplanes, but I had no time to eat. A passenger car arrived. Semenov and I were ordered to arrive at the command post. Ivanov was waiting for us there. Your task, Pokrishkin, scout the presence of crossings on the Prut River from Husha to Lipkany, showed the regiment commander on the map. Pay special attention to the area of Ungeni and Stefanesti. Fly in pairs. Semyonov will take the lead. Do not engage in combat, the main thing reconnaissance. Comrade Commander. I have permanent wingmen Dyachenko and Dovbyania. We've flown together. Permission to fly with Dyachenko. You'll fly with Semyonov. He's already had a baptism of fire yesterday. You see, there's a bullet mark on his cheek. He shot down one Me-109. He's already got some combat experience, albeit a little. What do you mean? Distrust for yesterday's mishap with the Su-2 or reinforcement of the pair by a pilot who had been shot at? After yesterday's offence, I should not have insisted on my own. Our pair approached the Prut from the side of the morning sun. The river, stretching in a white strip from north to south, was clearly visible. It was time to make a turn along the eastern bank, from the sunny side. I examined the river surface. Were there any pontoon bridges? I see that German fighters are barreling west of us, 3 at our height, and 2 above, apart. By rocking the airplane from wing to wing, I warned Semyonov about the enemy. He understood my signal. Unwillingly we go, without changing course, towards Messerschmitts, ready to fight, although there are 5 of them, and we are only 2. I was so looking forward to this fight with the enemy that I didn't think about anything but it. We're getting closer. I remembered Ivanov's firm warning. Do not engage in battle. The main thing is reconnaissance. The commander's order is stronger than the thirst for battle. We turned to the north, along the Prut, but Messers had already detected us and rushed after us. I look back. Enemy fighters are getting closer. We have to fight, or they will shoot us down like partridges. I act like in a drill, quickly, but without fuss. I reduce the pitch of the propeller, give the throttle sector of the engine on the forced mode of operation. With a vigorous turn, I rush towards the enemy. Semyonov is next to me, and we go into a frontal attack. In my sights, I have the middle airplane of the enemy's triple, the total speed of convergence more than 1,000 kilometers per hour. Seconds pass, and I open fire. The oncoming trails are pulling towards us. Almost crashing into the Me-109, I skip close over it and vigorously move my plane into a vertical slide. At the top point, I dump the MiG on the right wing and look to my right for the 3 Messerschmitts that skipped under us. I was firmly convinced that after a frontal attack it would go left combat turn, and in fact it did. There they are, below and ahead of me. The German pilot's habit of left combat turns was confirmed. Immediately, without wasting a second, I catch in the sight of the leading trio of Messers. Just had time to aim, as to the right of the wing of my airplane the trace is carried away. The upper pair of Me-109 came up, it and attacked me. The situation is not in our favour. I make another dash upwards, dark in the eyes from overload. At the top of the hill my vision is quickly restored. Confident that the pair of Me-109s chasing me could not create such an overload, and is somewhere ahead and below, I turn the plane around the vertical axis and see Messers, where I expected. Now it is necessary to attack, but at that time I caught a glimpse of Semyonov's plane. He is below me by 400 meters. What's wrong with it? Why white flakes of smoke behind the tail? He's being attacked by a trio of Messers, shot down and now will light up, flashed a thought, and, stopping the pursuit of the pair, I turn my plane into a vertical dive on the trio of Me-109. I enter the attack. We have to shoot down the lead, I decided. I skip past the wingman. Because of the high speed and slippage of the airplane at the conclusion of the dive, I was below the Me-109. I'm making a slide. Here it is, the enemy plane. At point-blank range I give a line on the belly, then the second. Flames burst out of the Messer's belly. In those seconds I forgot about everything. The first enemy plane was falling burning from my queue. Forgetting about caution, looked at this torch in the sky. Carelessness was immediately severely punished. Explosions of shells, blows of bullets shook my MiG. The fighter was in an inverted position. With difficulty turned the plane and continued to fight. 1 against 4. It was necessary to ensure a safe exit from the battle. Semyonov, whose plane is undoubtedly damaged. To fight off the Messerschmitts on a wounded airplane was not easy. In the right wing gaped a huge through hole. In the left wing, an enemy shell ruptured the upper covering. At high speed the airplane tended to turn over on its back, barely enough rudders to hold it. But the desire to save Semyonov, a comrade in arms forced to fight this unequal battle, reflecting the attacks of Messers and attacking them myself, I did not have even a second to look at my watch. However, common sense suggested Semyonov is already safe, and we must leave before they shoot him down. As soon as I made this decision, immediately making a sharp turn, vertical dive out of the battle, he flew to the airfield at extremely low altitude. I was thinking about Semyonov. What about him? Did he make it to ours? Before landing, I checked the landing gear hydraulic system. It turned out to be broken. I let them out safely and landed safely. I barely made it to the parking lot and turned off the engine. I couldn't get out of the cockpit right away. A terrible fatigue. Ivan Vakhnenko, the technician of the airplane, having inspected the damage, stood by the cockpit and looked at me in bewilderment. In my mind, I was reconstructing the whole picture of this heavy battle, my actions, explosions of enemy shells in the plane. I barely turned my head to look at the parking lots, and then I saw Semenov running up to my airplane. The joy that he was alive immediately removed all physical weight. I jumped out of the cockpit, dropped my parachute and stepped towards my comrade. Alive? Well, all the anxiety has fallen from my soul. I shouted to him. At that moment he was more dear to me than my brother. How badly were you hit? Not a single hole. But how did you end up here? When I was leaving, I saw you falling down burning, he asked in surprise. I've already reported to the command center that you were shot down. They mutilated the plane badly, but they didn't shoot it down. And Burning was the one who was going to shoot you down. Why did you leave the battle? The engine started acting up. The plugs went out as soon as I gave it some afterburner. Afterburner. Did you lighten the propeller before that? I forgot. I figured it out later. I wanted to come to your rescue, but when I saw you falling down burning, I turned back home. All right, I'm going to report to the CP. I was walking and thinking. Semyonov is a brave guy, but he was undertrained in the operation of the MiG, not knowing how to use the engine afterburner. Having heard the report, Ivanov said with a smile, Well, took my soul away. Congratulations on the first shot down, Messerschmitt. It turns out you can beat them. Only next time don't put the tail of the airplane in the enemy's crosshairs. But we have to reconnoiter. Take another airplane in the squadron and fly out with your link. The mission is the same. Yes, comrade commander. The task the squadron will fulfill. I answered cheerfully. We approached Prut at high altitude from the sun. Then steeply descended, combed the river section. We didn't find any crossings, so we went back. That was the end of that day for me. In the evening I again mentally presented the whole dynamics of the battle with 5 Messerschmitts. Destruction of the Mi-109s made me happy and gave me confidence in the future. However, in my mind all the time, like a worm, sharpened doubt about the correctness of actions. On the one hand, the victory over the Messerschmitt, on the other hand, heavy damage to my plane. The attack, of course, was risky, but justified. During it, 2 Mi-109s were behind my airplane, on the right and left. But if I had not shot down the leading one, it would have shot Semenov down seconds later. The mistake was that I, after igniting the Messerschmitt, delayed for a few seconds, watching the falling enemy plane. Here they are, the seconds used by the enemy. From the analysis of the first battle, there was a conclusion, which became an inviolable rule for me: do not look after the downed plane, and vigorously maneuver away and look for a new enemy. All the war won was guided by this law and taught it to my pilots. This rule has saved me and my comrades from death more than once. And the morning began with a call to the command post. Ivanov put before me an unexpected task. Fly with your unit to Pilitsa. Attack the German paratroopers on the airfield there. Take off immediately. In Pirlitz, we carefully inspected the airfield from above, but we found only 3 parachutes lying around. They must have been left by German pilots who landed from a downed bomber. We realized that it was one of those panic messages about the landing, which often came to the division from the locals. But you can't go home with unspent ammunition. I decided to go to the airfield of Iasi and storm it. We took a new course. North of the city, I found a couple of Messerschmitts going below our group. I let them pass under me and immediately spiked. I aimed at the leading Me-109. Our strike was lightning fast and accurate. With the first turn I shot the messer. The wingman turned in the western direction and started to run away. I was going to catch up, but looking in the direction of my partners, I saw that they were twisting loops. I looked closer. I saw that they were chasing each other with big overloads. I stopped the pursuit and rushed to help the wingmen. There was no enemy near them. By rocking my airplane from wing to wing, I hardly adjusted them and took a course to Mayaki. After landing, I immediately approached the pilots and asked, "Explain what happened. Why were you spinning like crazy?" Yes, Dovbia lined up in the tail of my plane, and I did not see, I thought it was a messer, and spun loops guiltily justified Dyachenko. Why did you tail Dyachenko's plane and chased him? I tried to keep up with him, and he was doing loops, and so was I. It's all clear. It's just a pity that because of your mess we missed the second mass. Well, good for you, though. They made a merry-go-round. As if in a circus, I scolded the wingman. That time he did not scold the young pilots, realizing that having seen the enemy fighters for the first time, they could not make sense of the air situation. Each saw an attacking Messerschmitt. It was good that they did not shoot at each other. In the first battle, many pilots make mistakes. Deep down I realize that such lessons will make them more cold-blooded, will make them more cautious in future battles. I return to this day many times mentally analyzed it. Even before the war, from the experience of air battles with Japanese pilots in Mongolia, with the Nazis in the skies of Spain, we knew young people are lost in the first battle. And yet apparently did not do everything to make the first meeting with the enemy was more or less successful. Speaking in modern terms, did not model the character of the pilot, the manner of his behavior in real combat, and probably for nothing. Of course, real combat reveals a lot. But it is necessary to cognize oneself, to prepare for the decisive battle long before it. Apparently, there was not enough. To fulfill the inviolable army rule to teach what is necessary in war. It seems that not enough attention was paid to the formation of true fighter qualities, coolness and prudence, boldness and reasonable assessment of the situation, savvy and initiative. Parade, fear of even reasonable risk in peaceful training, often shambolic view of future combat, hindered the forging of these qualities. The excessive self-confidence in the success of each battle, each flight on the principle since it is us, we will win, also hindered. This led willingly or unwillingly to underestimation of the enemy, which is always dangerous. High moral and political qualities of a fighter must necessarily be supported by solid military technical skills, the ability to master themselves and equipment, knowledge of the enemy. Let me return to the events of that period. German and Romanian commanders concentrated in the city of Iasi and its areas a large number of troops and military equipment. From here they were preparing a strike on Moldavia through Ungaini to Chisinau and Tiraspol. Air scouts of our and Kishinev regiments revealed this strong grouping of the enemy. Dyachenko and I have just returned from reconnaissance. In Iasi the enemy behaved calmly, not expecting an airstrike. And now our bombers, 9x9, go to the target. My pair, having refueled with fuel, also took a course to Iasi. There all our squadron, headed by a Trashkevich, accompanied the bombers. At the approach to the city I saw the clouds of smoke rising to the sky and fiery flames below. A huge bonfire of enemy equipment. Barraging in the sky, carefully searching, ready for the possible appearance of Messerschmitts. Below us, among the smoke, continued to drop bombs 9SB. Around them there were hundreds of bursts of anti-aircraft shells. We could clearly see these seemingly harmless white flakes. Suddenly one of the bombers burst into flames and went down. He fell into the midst of smoke and fire. Anger at Hitler's anti-aircraft gunners swept over me. Shaking wings warned Dyachenko and steeply dive on a battery of anti-aircraft guns. My wingman confidently follows. Even on previous sorties to Iasi I knew where the anti-aircraft guns were. And now it was not difficult to find them. The flames flying out of the barrels were clearly visible from above. A few assaults dispersed the battery calculations in the shelters. My Dyachenko and I went to gain altitude. A Messerschmitt, which appeared from somewhere, rushes past us. I turned to him, shallow turn as if luring into the fight, trying to put the enemy under the blow. Dychenko. Messer took the bait, began to turn around on me, not noticing the wingman. Dychenko acted clearly and confidently. He pierced the Me-109 with a cue, and the Hitler of its steep spiral fell to the ground. How happy I was with this luck of my wingman. He personally shot down the first enemy fighter. Victory raises the prestige of the pilot before his comrades in arms, causes confidence of the command, but most importantly, inspires the pilot's faith in himself and in his weapon. This is the beginning of the real formation of an air fighter. In such fights, character is forged, shyness and uncertainty disappear. Even outwardly, a pilot who has personal victories looks different. He is bolder to judge six combat, he has his own views, his favourite techniques and forms of manoeuvre, and that's right. At the airfield I inspected my airplane, there were no holes, but the cheerful mood spoiled the report. Vakhnenko. Comrade Commander, you will not have to fly until evening. The airplane is damaged. How did the engine work in the air? Normal. What happened? I asked him anxiously. A piece of anti-aircraft shell hit the nozzle and damaged the blower blades. Don't worry, we'll fix it tonight. We don't need this disaster. It's not a misfortune, Comrade Commander. It's worse. Ivan Vakhnenko stopped talking and turned away, looking past me. What's the matter? If you started it, then finish it. Did you hear what happened to Mironov? No. Tell me. Tell me, don't torture your soul. Mironov's gone. He died in the hospital. He was buried yesterday. This message was deafening, as if hit with a shoe. A lump came to my throat, preventing me not only to speak but also to breathe. Kostya, my friend, how could it be? The thoughts of death did not fit in my consciousness. At the command post I learned all the details of Mironov's ridiculous death. One of the experienced pilots strongly advised his subordinates to cut off the tether straps in the cockpit, as they, allegedly, restrain movements, interfere with circumspection in combat. Kostya's frivolous attitude to the advice of the experienced pilot ended badly. In the evening we flew to Myaki. The airplane ran out of fuel. Kostya decided to land forcibly with released landing gear. The airplane hit a ditch and went down. Mironov was thrown out of the cockpit, and in the fall he broke his spine. He saved the airplane, but died. It was a heavy loss for me. Kostya and I were like brothers-in-law. We had everything together. Of course, I had more life and aviation experience, and my friend always listened to my advice. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the war, there was no good comrade around to warn me against making a mistake. The image of this wonderful comrade, brave pilot, has remained with me forever. In the evening, Pavel Pavlovich Kryukov and his wingman returned to the regiment. Let me remind you that on the first day of the war they flew on reconnaissance to the Plosti area. As the pilots expected, they did not have enough fuel for the return trip, and they were forced to land, barely having flown over the border with Romania. Of course, everyone was happy that Pal Palik and his battle comrade, whom we had already considered dead, returned to the unit. The hard-fighting day was over. A release was required. Regimental wit asked Kryukov a lot of ironic questions. Pal Palik, have you been visiting Mr. Antonescu? How are the king and queen doing there? Didn't they invite you to a reception? Palik knew how to keep such a conversation going. Of course, he assured me. They arranged fireworks in our honour, all along the route. Then they sent an honorary escort of 3 pairs of messers. We are very pleased with the reception. And then he went back to his normal tone. We've been through a lot. We could barely get over the border, and then our infantry made us happy. Everyone was wondering if we were German spies. Until I gave him a good scolding, everyone was looking. Jokes against Krukov ended only with the arrival of the regiment commander, and the mood changed at once. Major Ivanov's message about the received schedule of actions for the next few days alerted all of us. The division command set the task to curb the actions of enemy aircraft from the airfield Romani by striking it in separate links in accordance with the schedule. From dawn to midday raids on the airfield every 2 hours should be carried out by units of the Kishinev Regiment, and in the afternoon Everyone was quiet. Everyone was thinking about the upcoming task. I mentally imagined the situation at Romana Airfield, with which I was already familiar during reconnaissance flights, dozens of anti-aircraft batteries guns, Oerlikon machine guns. I remembered the caps of bursting shells of large-caliber anti-aircraft artillery, the traces of cues. They're in my memory, but it's not the first time we've acted on such objects. The main thing is that the enemy, according to the schedule of our sorties, in 3 or 4 raids, will figure out the plan. Our triplets will be met by barrage enemy fighters, well-organized anti-aircraft fire. You cannot consider the enemy a fool. Apparently, when making this decision, the division headquarters had no idea what the Romani airfield was and how it was covered by anti-aircraft fire. Probably they proceeded from our anti-aircraft resources. At that time, unfortunately, there was not a single anti-aircraft machine gun on our airfield. Everyone who will have to fly to the Romani, there is something to think about, to reflect on how to solve this combat task. Squadron Commander Atrashkevich did not hold back, expressed his opinion. Comrade Regimental Commander, we are thus a great damage to the enemy will not cause. We will be met by anti-aircraft fire and fighters. It's better to strike once, but with the whole regiment. We have enough airplanes. If we act according to schedule, in a week we will be left without airplanes and without pilots. Every pilot at that moment agreed with Fyodor Atrashkevich's proposal. We reported to the Chief of Staff of the Division Kozlov our proposals. He confirmed the schedule of sorties. Ivanov replied, apparently realizing the dubiousness of the adopted schedule of actions. Orders, Comrade Atrashkevich, fulfill. And how to do it better you and I need to think. A little light from the airfield already took to the airplanes links went on reconnaissance, groups to attack enemy troops. In the second half of the day went to the airfield Romani. The first raids were without losses. It had the effect that the regimental headquarters in the first half of the day maintained contact with the neighbouring regiment, analysed their methods of action. Therefore, the first of our 3 came from directions from which the enemy least expected them. Major Ivanov skillfully led the combat operations, instructed each group, listened attentively to reports on the fulfillment of combat missions. None of the trio did not repeat the direction of the strike, altitude maneuver. Regimental commander, relying on the data of the headquarters, did everything to avoid a pattern in combat operations. He even slightly shifted the time of the strikes. The sun was already above the horizon, when to the parking lots of our planes came bomb explosions from the direction of Kotovsk. Everyone listened. It became clear the enemy aviation was bombing the city. Instantly about 10 MiGs took off. The group headed for Kotovsk. 9 U-88s, having bombed the station, turned to the west. Our pilots attacked them from the start. Junior Lieutenant Yakovlev, who was the first, aimed at the leading bomber and, without leaving the attack, crashed into it. The enemy formation fell apart. Continuous attacks pilots destroyed Junkers one after another. The last of the 9 was shot down over the Prut River. Only then the group returned to the airfield. It was a great victory. I landed with difficulty. The only bullet that hit the plane punctured the oil tank, but still there was enough oil. It saved the engine from jamming and me from a forced landing. After landing, there was a lot of talk about this successful fight. Soon we learned the details of the death of the brave pilot Nikolai Yakovlev. Success in the destruction of 9 Junkers was largely predetermined by his daring attack. Having shot down the leader of the enemy group, he broke the control and psychologically suppressed the organized opposition of the enemy. Yakovlev was killed while diving. The bullet hit him in the head, but the MiG, aimed with a firm hand, crashed into the bomber. By dying, Yakovlev ensured victory for his comrades in arms. He showed an example of rage and hatred of the enemy. His tragic fate overshadowed the joy of our victory, but it also instilled pride for the hero. After learning the details of the death, the pilots unwittingly or unwillingly complained about our aircraft designers for the lack of armoured front windows on the fighters. We already knew that the Messerschmitts had them.